The fantasy basketball playoffs start on Monday, and this is the point in the season where being a passive manager will get you eliminated. This is where the aggressive managers separate themselves from everyone else. If you're only looking at the players on your roster and not planning ahead, you're already a step behind the competition. At this stage of the season, the schedule becomes just as important, if not more important, than the individual players themselves. Some teams have packed schedules with great matchups, while others in situations where their players may be rested or have fewer opportunities. So in today's video, we're going to break down the teams you should be targeting right now and the teams you should be avoiding as we head into the fantasy playoffs. If you make the right moves before the week even starts, you could give yourself a massive advantage before the first matchup even tips off. Welcome back to The Corner, your #1 destination for everything fantasy basketball related. Every single week, I'm bringing you guys the best waiver pickups, strategies to stay ahead of your competition, and the moves you need to make it if you really want to win your league. If you've been enjoying the content and it's been helping you dominate your matchups all year long, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a single upload. Trust me, you don't want your league mates getting this information before you do. Now let's get into the video. Now, to kick off this video, we are going to focus on teams that you should absolutely be targeting right now as we head into the playoffs. This is where planning ahead can give you a massive advantage over the rest of your league. And it's important to note that the playoff weeks I'm going to be using are weeks 20, 21, and 22. These are pretty much the standard playoff weeks used across most fantasy basketball leagues, so the data we're going through today is based on that format. If your league is currently not using these playoff weeks and this information may not be as useful to use as it should be, and honestly, if that's the case, it's something that you should 100% look to fix for next season, because using the standard playoff format is going to make this a lot easier to plan ahead in the future. And you want to be taking advantage of the schedule when it matters the most. Now, with that out of the way, let's start looking at the teams that you should be targeting this year's playoffs. The teams that I'm looking to target over the next 3 weeks are going to be the Nets, the Nuggets, Warriors, Clippers, and the Grizzlies. The reason for this is flat out simple. Schedule volume. Every single one of these teams play 4 games per week during the fantasy playoffs. And when you're talking about playoff matchups, that kind of volume can win you your week almost by itself. Now, outside of the Nuggets, these teams don't necessarily have the most exciting fantasy options right now. But when a team is playing 4 games every single week, even the role players become extremely valuable. More games means more minutes, more opportunities, and more chances to accumulate fantasy points, especially if you're in a points league where raw production matters the most. And of course, if you have access to the star players from these teams, you're sitting in a fantastic spot. Players like Michael Porter Jr., Nikola Jokic, and Kawhi Leonard, if he can stay healthy throughout these couple of weeks, could easily end up being league winners during the stretch, simply because they'll have so many opportunities to produce elite numbers. But where things get really interesting is with the role players. These are the guys that can quietly swing a matchup because they're playing 4 games while your opponent might have players who only play 2 or 3 that week. Over the course of a playoff matchup, that difference can and will add up very quickly. And these are the few names that I'm going to personally be looking to grab right now before the playoffs start. I won't go too deep into the breakdown here because I'm planning to do a whole separate video about that next week, where I'll go into more details about these players like my usual videos. But a few guys that should absolutely be on your radar include Jordan Miller, Cam Spencer, Gigi Jackson, Omax Prosper, Nolan Traore, I think I butchered that one's, but Danny Wolf and Tim Hardaway Jr. And there's so much more. These are the type of players that might not look exciting on paper, but when you combine expanded roles with the 4-game playoff schedule, they can end up absolutely wrecking your competition and being incredibly valuable during this final stretch of the fantasy season. Now, on the flip side, there are also some teams that I would 100% try to avoid relying on heavily during the playoffs, mostly because of their schedule, especially in the first round. The team with the most glaring issue is going to be the Pelicans. If you're rostering players like Zion or Sadiq Bey, you're unfortunately already facing a huge uphill battle in that first round of the playoffs. The Pelicans only played 2 games in that first week and only 10 games throughout the 3 weeks of the playoff stretch, which is a huge disadvantage compared to the teams playing 11 or even 12 games. Now, to be clear, this is not me saying that you should drop your star players. Don't be stupid. And this is not me saying that you should panic, move away from them either. But it is important to understand the math here. When your opponent has players playing 4 games while yours are only playing 2 or 3, that gap can add up very quickly over a playoff matchup. Outside of the Pelicans, the other teams with 10 total games in the playoff stretch are the Celtics, the Hornets, the Bulls, Cavs, Mavs, Lakers, Heat, Timberwolves, Thunder, Suns, and the Spurs. A very long list. If your roster is stacked with players from these teams, you need to just be aware that you may need to stream aggressively to make up the difference in the games being played. Now, it's important to understand that the most aggressive manager is usually the one who wins during the playoffs. This is not the time to sit back on your hands and hope that your roster can carry you through the rest of the weeks. You need to stay active on the waiver wire and use your pickups throughout the entire week. Don't hold on to streamers hoping that they might have a good game later in the week. You need to be rotating your players actively, chasing hot nights, and maximizing the amount of games played on your roster if you want to stay ahead of your opponent. At this point of the season, it is do or die. The managers who are constantly making moves are the ones who usually end up advancing and winning the championship. So that is going to be all of the tips that I have for the upcoming fantasy playoffs this week. At this point in the season, it's time to lock in, stay aggressive, and do whatever it takes to bring home that championship this year. If you have enjoyed this video and you want even more ways to get ahead of your league, then you need to watch the video that's on your screen right now. In that video, I break down some of the best under the radar pickups that could help you win your fantasy league this season. Trust me, you do not want your opponent finding these players before you do. Thanks for stopping by the corner, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.